So, if you really want to completely ruin and deflate an otherwise spectacular hero character, here's how you do it. You just commit the unpardonable sin of not creating an opponent character who's a worthy point of contrast and conflict. But you wouldn't want to do that, would you? Because you're a person who, bless your heart, values a good story. So that being the case, let's quickly talk about how a writer might avoid fucking up an opponent character, their relationship with the hero, and along with it the entire story. In his book, The Anatomy of Story, John Truby clues us into one of the main purposes of the opponent character archetype. Structurally, the opponent holds the key because your hero learns through his opponent. It is only because the opponent is attacking the hero's great weakness that the hero is forced to deal with it and grow.
Tyler, I don't understand this.
You were looking for a way to change your life. You could not do this on your own.
In the beginning of Fight Club, the narrator is someone who's doing everything in his power to avoid change. In other words, he's a character in dire need of a good opponent. But every time his life, or from our perspective the story itself, tries to give him an obstacle to face off with, he very promptly finds a way of evading whatever it is.
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
Not only does he use the reasonably harmless escapes of retail therapy and a compulsive nesting instinct as very temporary fixes for the emptiness he feels, but the narrator also callously invades support groups, all in an effort to get secondhand relief at the expense of people who are doing the frightening work of actually facing their own battles. The narrator's entire life orbits around the desolate planet of avoidance.
Babies don't sleep this well.
And the explosive pressure generated by that perennial avoidance eventually comes to a crux, when, almost as though he's compelled by the story he's trapped within, the narrator is finally driven to internally manufacture an opponent for himself. One that is so perfectly tailored to him that it's utterly impossible to evade or ignore. Tyler Durden.
One can make all kinds of explosives using simple household items.
Really?
If one was so inclined.
But one of the main reasons I chose Fight Club to use as a workspace to explore the opponent archetype is that a lot of effort clearly went into making sure Tyler is never portrayed as a one-dimensional, shallow, mustache-twirling villain. John Truby says, "In most real conflict, there is no clear sense of good and evil, right and wrong. In a well-drawn story, both hero and opponent believe that they have chosen the correct path, and both have reasons for believing so."
Come on, this isn't funny. That wasn't funny. What the fuck was the point of that?
Tomorrow will be the most beautiful day of Raymond Castle's life.
The fact that we're able to join the narrator at Tyler's knee and hear so many of his philosophies and perspectives on life is so incredibly important. A flashing neon indication that a writer's done a good job fleshing out a lifelike villain is that sometimes the story takes us beyond just understanding their internal psychology. In fact, an audience might catch themselves momentarily sympathizing or even out and out agreeing with some of the opponent's thought process.
I say never be complete. I say stop being perfect. I say let's evolve.
Now, we might not immediately get up and start making soap, but we can't help but have our minds be stirred to rapt attention by the beliefs Tyler expresses with so much conviction. And that gives the eventual conflict between Tyler and the narrator so much greater complexity and makes for a much more engaging story. But even beyond that, for the sake of the story and the depth of its conflict, it's important to give the opponent some redemptive characteristics and the hero some damning ones. For instance, especially at the beginning of the story, the narrator is both a liar and an addict, and he selfishly betrays other people who are suffering horrifically traumatic events by, I guess you could say, voyeuristically feeding off of their trusting vulnerability.
Well, I'm still here, but I don't know for how long.
On the other hand, Tyler is a man who is uncompromising in his beliefs. He welcomes men from all walks of life, professions, and appearances into Fight Club without any prejudice. He's a man who leads by example and who even takes a severe beating to make sure his men continue to have a place to meet together. And whatever the ends of Fight Club and Project Mayhem might have been, Tyler's intentions of lifting these beaten down men out of at least what he perceives as bondage comes from a place that could possibly be held as noble.
Our great war is a spiritual war. Our great depression is our lives.
But for all these differences between the hero and opponent, John Truby details a very important similarity that I don't think many people realize is so absolutely crucial to effective storytelling. If you give your hero and opponent two separate goals, each one can get what he wants without coming into direct conflict, and then you have no story at all. A true opponent not only wants to prevent the hero from achieving his desire, but is competing with the hero for the same goal. Now, at first, this might sort of sound like bullshit. In your classical story, the villain is trying to bring about some nefarious plot, whereas the hero is trying to stop them. Two things that seem pretty divergent, right? But if you break a story down to its bones, I think you'll find that any good story follows this rule that Truby's laid out. Let's give you two examples to look at. How about first, Jaws? Jaws is a story about a conflict between man and shark and the battle over the shared goal of holding the place at the top of the food chain.
Smile, you son of a...
Okay, so now something different. What about Harry Potter? Underneath all the dazzling visuals and magic, the central conflict that drives the story is between Harry and Voldemort, and over the importance and necessity of love. Is love something that should be cherished or tossed aside? Does it make you strong or weak? The fight between Harry and Voldemort is ultimately a war over the shared goal of defining the nature of love. Okay, now we can get back to Fight Club. The goal that the narrator and Tyler Durden share is one of addressing the pain of feeling monetized, marginalized, and emasculated by modern life. And the conflict of the story is created by the opposing methods that the two of them have for going about accomplishing the shared goal of alleviating that boiling, furious angst. Even by the climax of the story, the narrator's still looking for ways of distracting himself from the agonizing status quo, and Tyler's extremist solutions continue to be revealed to be more and more violently aggressive.
Let me have it, please!
First, you have to give up. First, you have to know, not fear, know that someday you're gonna die.
The necessary opponent either forces the hero to overcome his weakness or destroys him. Put another way, the necessary opponent makes it possible for the hero to grow. There are innumerable different kinds of stories, but all the best stories share something in common. They are depictions of change, and at the very end of Fight Club, the narrator is given a choice. Either fully confront Tyler Durden and for the first time in his life, wholly commit to change, or be absorbed and annihilated by the opponent who shares his body.
I could have zoomed in your hand. I can't see my hand.
I think there's a lot of symbolic importance to the narrator's victory strangely being signified by shooting himself. And I think the key to understanding what that symbolism is exactly is what the narrator says right before he pulls the trigger.
My eyes are open.
It's an admission that he knows the way he's lived his life up until that point is wrong. The ending to the narrator's arc is fascinating because he's destroying himself just as much as he's killing Tyler. The only way to defeat Tyler Durden was not only to understand what was wrong about his philosophy, but also what was right about it. And to come to the profound realization that the change that was needed and the right way to live his life was somewhere between himself and his opponent. Well, thanks for watching my video. If you enjoyed this look at Fight Club and what makes it such a powerful story, make sure to show me by hitting subscribe.